De-risking is one of the hottest words these days. Or more precisely, the hottest word the United States and its allies are now using against China. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's speech at the end of March this year started this de-risking fever. U.S. President's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan subsequently echoed the same. The G7 leaders in the Hiroshima Summit communique re-emphasized it as well. Although every time they put forward the concept of de-risking, they all added something along the lines of, "We are not saying that we want to decouple. But come on, what you're up to is only too evident." De-risking or decoupling is only a game of rhetoric being played by the United States and its allies. It is a different word, but the venom against China remains the same. I'm Sina. Welcome to FactStyle. First of all, we must realize that risk and de-risking are indeed common concepts in business. Risk is a constant of business cooperation, and there are various commercial insurance systems in international trade to reduce risk. These are all legitimate considerations. Risk prevention and business cooperation are not opposite, but they complement each other. On the basis of encouraging business cooperation to continue to flourish, the control of risk should be improved as well. However, when the United States and its allies talk about de-risking, have you ever heard of it being used against any other country besides China? It really sounds like the essence of the so-called de-risk is actually de-China. European Commission President von der Leyen's speech on March 30 clearly showed it.
This is why, after de-risking through diplomacy, the second strand of our future China strategy must be economic de-risking. The starting point for this is having a clear-eyed picture on what the risks are.
Okay, first diplomacy, then economy. Today, let's zoom in on the latter. What are the risks, and what are their coping strategies in terms of European economy? Well, sit tight. It's all about China.
The first one is making our own economy and industry more competitive and resilient. We know this is an era where we rely on one single supplier, China.
President von der Leyen was talking about Europe's clean tech sector. According to her, an important source of key inputs in this sector is China. But is that something unreasonable? Global trade exchanges inevitably involve import and export, and the trend of import and export depends to a large extent on the different location advantages of various countries. This is almost common sense in Economic 101. If Europe is closely linked to China in one economic sector, Europe's dependence on the United States can be said to be all-round. For example, in terms of finance, Paul Eckeliner, chair of the Global Advisory Board at Deutsche Bank, said that Europe is now almost totally dependent on U.S. capital markets, according to the Financial Times. He stressed, if you want to get anything sizable done, whether it is an acquisition or an IPO, you always go back to American investors. And not to mention how much European defense depends on the U.S. But have you ever heard Europeans shouting every day that they want to de-risk with the U.S. in defense and finance? It only matters when it comes to China.
The second part of this de-risking strategy is better using our existing toolbox of trade instruments. Over the past years, we've put in place measures to address security concerns, whether on 5G, the foreign direct investment, or export controls.
Yeah, 5G. Another China-related trade sector that has witnessed political intervention by European politicians for years. Just a month ago, the European Commission announced moves to block the Chinese companies Huawei and ZTE from EU research funding and stop contracting operators using Chinese equipment.
My third point. China's changing policies may require us develop new defensive tools for some critical sectors. The European Union needs to define its future relationship with China and other countries in sensitive, high-tech areas, such as microelectronics, quantum computing, robotics, artificial intelligence, biotech, you name it.
Rather than accusing China of changing its policies, Europe's policies in these high-tech areas have indeed not changed much in recent years. Continue to restrict China's normal trade in these areas. If you're interested, you can check out our previous shows to find out the full stories behind these restrictions.
The fourth part of our economic de-risking strategy is alignment with other partners. On issues that concern our economic security, we have much in common with our partners around the world. This is especially true to our G7 and G20 partners, and those in the region and beyond who are often more integrated with China and more advanced in their thinking on de-risking.
Let me translate this typical politician's comments into something everyone can understand. Europe will work with our allies like America and draw countries that have close business ties with China to our side to do what has been done for years. Again, restricting China's development. 1, 2, 3, 4. All 4 parts target China. Is China the only possible economic risk for Europe? Is de-risking really just an economic concept here, but not an excuse for achieving political goals? And you and I now may have the same question after going through these words. Is there any substantial difference between de-risking and the previous decoupling concept? I don't see any significant difference. The United States and its allies have simply used a different term to rename the unchanged essence of the strategies that they have been firmly pursuing, blocking China from further development, especially in the crucial areas. Then why would the US and its allies bother to use a new slogan? It might be because the new slogan is more applicable to the current situation. When I heard the word de-risking for the first time, it sounded like it represented a mild attitude. It sounds pretty commercial, especially not political. Decoupling has long been a red flag, and the possible results of it are pretty binary. For now, complete decoupling seems doomed to failure.
But I do think it's a mistake to think that we can decouple from China. That's just not realistic. Our economies are really linked, and they're going to be linked for quite some time.
De-risking is the only term that works because decoupling is not feasible. The economies of the West, of the G7 nations, are so integrated with China that the idea of decoupling is catastrophic for them as much as it would be for China, if not more so.
Rather than using the term to cause disputes and disappointment, the United States and its allies have now switched to a seemingly friendlier, more commercial and vaguer concept, de-risking. They are using a seemingly softer attitude to legitimize their long-standing strategy towards China, and at the same time, they are stealthily giving themselves a way out. After all, the fact is that the United States and its allies are deeply intertwined with China economically. But there's a problem with this ambiguous language of de-risking. It exposes the hypocritical logical contradictions the U.S. and its allies always have on this issue.
Before you get onto that for a second, Ambassador, let me interrupt you just for a second before you get onto the specific German aspect of this. How can those two things live together comfortably? The idea that you're accusing, not you, the G7 is accusing China of being a rival and putting it in a combative and gladiatorial kind of framing, while at the same time saying, well, we understand the need for trade and we want to de-risk and not decouple. These are contrary and not particularly credible positions to hold, and Beijing is pointing this out quite clearly. They're saying you can't, if you want to cooperate, you have to cooperate. You can't say we're rivals in this context.
That's it. You can't use a seemingly benign word to cajole China into cooperating in the areas that you want to cooperate with. At the same time, restrict China in the areas that you want to restrict. How naive do you have to be to think that China is going to fall for this kind of art of language? As a journalist, this interesting word switching reminds me of the rhetorical games commonly used by politicians that our communication textbooks told us at school. The United States and its allies are masters of these skills. If de-risking does not work well, what will be the next term? How about bringing back rebalancing? Not only does it sound even gentler, but they can also put themselves in the victim's shoes. Alright, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Although this time, there won't be see you next time, as this will be the last episode I host for Factstel. But I do hope you guys continue to love this show as you always do, as your support means the most to us. I'll definitely miss Factstel and you guys. I'm Sina.